Technology has become an integral part of our daily lives. Artists and creators are using algorithms and AI as new tools for artistic expression, and it's becoming essential to reflect on the important impact that these emerging technologies are bringing into the art world. Our guests for this event will bring you different perspectives on how technologies are currently impacting their own practices and the works that they are object to their studies. Please allow me a brief introduction to the guests of tonight. So I'll start with Ingrid. Ingrid Luquet-Gad is currently in charge of the art section of Les Inrecuptibles, until recently a member of the editorial board of Spike Art magazine and correspondent for Flash Art International. She's also pursuing a PhD in art and media theory at the University of Paris, co-directed with the University of Paris 8, devoted to strategies of autonomy in the arts of the 2010s. Her writing explored the ontological and epistemological transformations brought about by new technologies, as reflected in the mirror held up to the present time by artists. Galle explores idiosyncratic uses of image and language that are co-created with algorithms, the mediation of the world through ever-profiling, falsifying, and quantifying images and texts that are both bought and human-generated, have had a dramatic impact on the conceptions of art, humor, absurdity, politics, economics, and language itself. His practice critically reflects this mediation using websites, drawings, electronics, and manipulated texts, presented both offline and in public space on the internet. His work has been shown in MoCA, Beaux-Arts, British Film Institute, Vils International Film Festival of Rotterdam, EMAF International Film, among others. One more guest is our esteemed curator of the show that is currently also in show at Mudam, Deep Down. Tirdad Zolghadr is an independent curator, critic, and writer. Along with Shirana Shabazi, he co-curated the current exhibition at Mudam, Deep Down. He teaches at the graduate school Universität der Kunst, Berlin. His writing includes fiction as well as publications based on extensive curatorial research, such as Realty Beyond the Traditional Blueprints of Art and Gentrification. Recent curatorial work includes an associate curatorship at Institute for Contemporary Art, Berlin, but also biennals as well as long-term collective initiatives. And last but not least, Federico Bomba. He will be the mediator of tonight's conversation. And he is the artistic director of Sineglossa and research fellow in human-computer interaction at the Free University of Bologna. After an MA in analytical philosophy at the University of Bologna and master in performing arts, he directed shows at festivals around the world until 2014, when he finally founded Sineglossa, and a research center and cultural enterprise. He deals with creating digital ecosystems in which artists, scientists, entrepreneurs, and public administrations collaborate to produce economic and social development. He's also the artistic director of Art Plus Equal Love Festival and advisor of the Art and Science Project for museums and private organizations. He's a contributor for several online and offline magazines of contemporary art, urban generative, and cultural economy. Welcome all, and Tirdad, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Antonio, for this introduction. Thank you all for being here. It's great to be part of this. So I will be speaking for 5 to 10 minutes, and I will mainly try to introduce the show, the ideas behind the show, Deep Down, which is on in the West Wing and the East Wing, the galleries adjacent to this auditorium. And as Antonio was saying, I've been teaching, writing, curating for a while, and my specialization has little to do with the algorithmic. I've been interested in exhibitions as medium, and institutional critique, in what is now called decolonial practices, although it wasn't always called that. And the algorithmic emerged as a method and a metaphor as we were trying to develop this show. It's a collection show, and Shirana Shahwazi and myself were invited and tried to come up with something we found convincing. And the first idea that we had was to exhibit the entire collection in one fell swoop and to see what would happen. And we chuckled about this idea as one of these crazy ideas you have over breakfast, and we put it to one side, and then we tried to zoom in on the more traditional effort of curating a collection in the way of trying to unearth those hidden gems, to curate them as generously as possible, to create curatorial surprises and this kind of thing. But the idea of showing the whole thing somehow remained the most convincing idea, and that is what we eventually wound up doing to a degree and in a certain way. I'll get to that. Before I actually summarize what the show is, I don't know if you've had the chance to see it yet. Let me explain why I think that it's a valid argument, a valid experiment, and you'll see what it has to do with tonight's event as well. So it really foregrounds this very weird and wonderful phenomenon that we call the public collection in an uncompromising way. It makes it tangible, understandable, and sensational in every sense of the term. At least it tries to. When you work as a curator, I assume some of you have, it's very hard to do justice to more than one thing at a time. If it's a solo show, it's the artist. If it's a big group show, it's usually the curator who kind of shines above everything else. If it's a thematic show, you can introduce things very simply, like it can be a very good introduction to complex topics. And a collection show can feel a bit artificial, even if you do foreground the collection as the collection. What this show does is, I would say that it embraces this artificiality. It accelerates and maximizes this artificiality, and it allows it to flip over into something new, into something that can fail as well. It could have failed, this experiment. I don't think it did, but you'll be the judge of that. What was also at the back of our minds as we were putting this together is the fact that a collection, it has an exclusionary connotation, not only in the sense that not everyone gets in, but also that most works rarely see the light of day. A tiny fraction of the collection is ever exhibited at a time, if ever. And that sounds melancholic, but I want to highlight the fact that this show is not attempting to critique this. If you're in the collection, you're good. Your work will be taken care of. You're in a good place. It's not trying to, turn this into some kind of exercise in poetic, some poetic gesture about the crypt or the cavern or some such. On the contrary, we're trying to turn the collection into something you can grasp intellectually and physically. To render more obvious the collection's natural state of being is what we put in the press release. The collection aside, this was an attempt to work with absolutely all the tools at our disposal and to put them all in the forefront. So the crates of the works, the Excel files, the documentation JPEGs, the backstage administrative procedures, to make them as clear parts of the curatorial process as possible. And this is where I'm slowly getting a little closer to what we're calling the automated or the algorithmic. So working in this way and also trusting the museum to a very large degree, allowing a lot of the curatorial agency to just hand that over to the museum, It clarified to which degree the Mudam is not only highly professional, well-funded, high-tech, but also highly automated. It made me realize that my methods are actually much more old-school, romantic, authorial than I like to admit. And it also helped us acknowledge that a curator is in itself an assemblage composition, a byproduct of teamwork on every level, from the admin to the conceptual heavy lifting. Now, I'll get to what we actually did. So to exhibit as much of the collection as possible doesn't mean that we had free reign. There are spatial constraints, there are financial constraints, but also, and perhaps most interestingly, we realized that stuffing the rooms with art, just like using every little corner, would have been a much more subjective exercise than finding a clear set of parameters that we submit the curatorial process to. It's maybe hard to imagine, but I invite you to go through this process in your mind's eye and to imagine how you would actually fit hundreds of artworks within a single space, and how many subjective decisions you would have to make in order to make that possible. And this was precisely what we wanted to avoid. So what we did instead was we set up a certain set of rules and pressed play. We retained one work per whichever artist was first in the indexical listing, respectively. Then we excluded those works which had complex instructions or unclear documentation and so forth. From the remaining items, we began to work with the smallest. And so in the one gallery, we showed the very smallest two-dimensional items. In the other gallery, we showed the smallest, the remaining smallest two-dimensional items in alphabetical order. The sculptural work was also included in that gallery. This is the West Gallery. The audiovisual work was shown here in this auditorium, also according to size, or better said in this case, duration, starting with the shorter works and working our way to the longer ones. And remaining items were exhibited within crates. That's the sort of scenography that you see right outside. If you leave the auditorium, you'll see this strange twin auditorium, the ugly little brother of this high-tech sort of professional auditorium, where we use the crates of the work as a place to create a kind of makeshift auditorium for the programming. So there the crates adopted an aesthetic function beyond a purely functional one. And some of the crates also tell stories of wear and tear that you would otherwise not see if all these materials were hidden backstage, which is usually the case during the curatorial process. I would rather bring in further ideas in discussion. I've been speaking specifically about the show, and I think at some point I would like to share why I think that this algorithmic approach is something that I have learned from enormously, and why I think it could work in many contexts beyond this one, even if it does have certain limits. And I also hope that we can talk about institutional precedents. What I will just add before leaving the stage to Jerry is that, to me, although I'm not a specialist within this field, I can relate to it because I see it as part of a much broader effort towards finding new parameters within art. An effort to depersonalize, de-authorialize, to find certain forms of transparency, and to break with very traditionalist ideas of what is the good and the bad and the ugly. So yeah, to see this kind of exercise as part of a context of which I've been a part for a while. That sounds a bit abstract, but I'll leave it at that. Maybe it'll convey a sense of mystery and suspense that we can come back to in conversation. So thank you very, very much, and I'll hand over to Jerry. The floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Galle. I'm an artist. I've been working with computers for far too long, I think. And it's kind of messed up my mind a bit. And my work is sort of about that friction that I have with working with computers, programming a lot, and not knowing anymore where the programming starts and where my own mind ends. So it's kind of close to me in a way. And I try to keep it simple also in that way. I've been working with AI now before the big boom happened. I think that was around 4 years ago or something. I tried to program my own AIs before that with neural networks and stuff like that, which is really cumbersome. It took me a lot of time and effort. But I learned from it because I kind of like the small AIs, the ones that I trained myself, that weren't reflecting these bigger, these massive AIs like Midjourney. All the things you probably know about the ChatGPT. The things I train are very small and kind of also uncontrollable and full of mistakes, which I really like. This is a recent project of mine where I trained an AI on all the languages that I could find online, also dead ones, from all over the world, and I trained an AI with it. I started asking it questions, sort of interviewing it, and it gave me back these weird symbols. It's kind of mixes of all kinds of languages, all kinds of pictograms, even emojis popped up. It was really, funny. The only thing is I couldn't read it anymore. I didn't know what he was doing, or it, or whatever it is. So I had to train another one to kind of decrypt it. So it was kind of an encryption thing going on. And this I kept for myself. I didn't put that one online, and most of my works are online. And I thought, maybe this is kind of a message to a future AI. It could be that a future AI doesn't know what it's about and finds it really stupid. Or it can decipher it and read what it's actually saying. Most of the messages, what they're saying is kind of mystical. Not so dystopian as I thought they would be, but they were interesting, so I kept them to myself and produced a lot of these plays. I think I have 20 of them now. And I'm exhibiting them, and I don't know what I'm going to do with the messages. I'm still thinking about how to put them to the public, or maybe put a timer on it or something, that in 2050 people can read it. I don't know. This is an example of small programs that I write that kind of reflect my messed up being. So I think everybody knows how it is to think in a loop, to constantly think the same thing and try to get out of that loop. And I thought, why not try and program it? So I started with patterns, and I programmed in the software that could maybe escape the loop sometimes. And so it did this. It's made with a little drawing robot. So it's an actual paper with pens. And these are 5 attempts of it trying to break the loop. I think it's, it kind of says it all that maybe people are starting to become more like computers. There's this kind of strange thing happening, especially the last 5-6 years, I think. I also like using AIs a lot because they kind of make me not think about myself anymore. So I can look at things from the AI, which is then kind of like an alien thing or a thing external from my own mind, which diminishes my own ego and even my own tastes, which I find quite exciting. So it's not always about me, but also about this thing that is making images or drawings or displays. This is a recent video. I saw this Memory is a Delay in a Valentino's Reichenberg book. It's a very old book. A guy who made these little robots, and it's a very interesting book. You should read it. And one chapter was about memory being a delay. So he mechanically, electronically made memory very early on. It was before computers even. And I found it very striking in a way, because I started thinking, yeah, memory is a kind of delay. You start forgetting the memory also, so the delay becomes a bit like feedback. So I programmed this AI with images of the human skin or the human body, in fact, and bioorganisms. I don't know why I did that, but I just did. And so all these images started popping up, and I fed it through another software program that feedbacks the whole thing all the time. So it's kind of looping through what they call the latent space, whatever. And then, yeah, these quite beautiful images came out, and I found it very interesting to work with. I don't have a video of it. This is a very short introduction of my work, so I think I'll keep that up, and we can talk later.
So now we have heard two point of views of the curator and the artist, and very logically I will now speak from the point of view of the critic, which actually is not an easy task when you are confronted with a very new technology. And so my working hypothesis here will be of obsolescence as a critical strategy used by artists. But I thought that actually it was necessary to look a bit at history, look at moments of technological change, and actually, if you think about the emergence of AI, if you want to find a comparable moment, you have to go actually way back. You have to go way back to the beginning of the 19th century. And this would be corresponding to the beginning of photography. So if you think back to how art critics have dealt with photography, it is a history of missed opportunities. You might know that the origin of photography started with a diorama. Diorama, which was this kind of very rudimentary invention, a way of making images move. So here you basically just have a canvas and a few candles behind. And to come to photography, you would have actually to see the alliance between the first invention and a second kind, which would then give birth to the daguerreotype, which would be licensed by the Academy of Science in Paris. So the beginning of photography is actually one place under the auspices of science. It was a scientific tool to measure visible reality. And so here you can see a caricature that was printed in main newspaper at the time, which was Tirdad, so one of the inventors of photography, who was actually trying to raise photography to the rank of art. So you see already that the links between photography, between science, and art were one that were already misunderstood. So misunderstood that actually people, the general public reading the newspaper would understand that it was a tool for laughter. And if you think also now about the relationship between the critics and this moment of technological invention, there is a famous example which is that of Charles Baudelaire. So Charles Baudelaire, the big poet, the very romantic figure, the literary hero, writing all those very poetic books about roaming in Paris. Charles Baudelaire was also an art critic that was defending modernity. That was actually the inventor of the word modernity. But when it comes to photography, it was the one who was one of the most ferocious contemptors of photography. In the Salon of 1859, there was this small text that he wrote on photography, and if you read the text, it is one of being very afraid of that scientific invention of photography, being very afraid that photography would actually mean that scientific mind, that rationality, was actually going to gain power over art, over invention, over not reproducing nature but inventing nature. So there is one sentence of Baudelaire that has remained famous, and it is that photography should remain the humble servant of science and art, the very humble servant. So when we think about this missed opportunity, if we want to compare it with AI, we have to make another detour through time, and that would be the question of art and technology in the 2010s. And in the 2010s, what we see arriving is this whole generation of post-internet artists who were formed in art school and who then were starting to work with technological system and make it a subject of their work. And what we see appearing here is a deadlock of newness. And already at the moment, one of the big issues were the question of what if there is no big thing. And so you have another article by Douglas Coupland in eFlux asking himself what will actually again become of art if all the young artists are only using technology, and if the only value or the main value that you would ascribe to the artworks, and even the monetary value, is that of the technique they use. So you see arriving this question, and maybe the end of history, the end of art, so to speak. That is a question that when a dealer speaks to a potential client about a new artist, the client almost always asks, is this new artist young? How young? And how is the technology they are using? Has it been released before? Or is it anyone else using this technology? So the question you see appearing is that of an art leaning against technology, and at best, maybe artists making errors with that new technology. But as you see, we are approaching more and more toward this dead end of artists being, again, servants of technology. So if we now come to the present moment, and if we now look at AI, what we can see is actually the fact that those two precedents in history, those two precedents where technology and art have had those frictions, is actually now being reversed with AI. If we take two case studies, you can see that artists are starting to use AI not as a way to push technology, not as a way to lean against technology, but rather as a way of slowing down technology. And so that is the reason why I wanted to speak about obsolescence. And we see here two case studies of two artists who are using AI, but who are using AI in a kind of different way that the tech world would want to. So instead of using the last update, they are trying to use not the first one, but maybe the one before. So for instance, here you have an exhibition from 2022 by Davide Badula, who has programmed some screens with text. And the system has been mining some of his previous works. So he used a system that took all the labels at the gallery from the works that were already in the files of the gallery. From that, he generated a series of instructions. So instructions like you would have in maybe conceptual art, like you would have in performance as well. So very leaning toward this full 70s genealogy. And the AI was generating scripts or prompts that were then to be executed as works. So what you can see was a series of works. So here you can see how it was exhibited in the gallery, meaning that one work was the screen, with the prompts on the screen, and then the gallery assistant, or the people working in the gallery, who executed the work. Meaning here, for instance, it was a series of roses and potato chips. And the roses and potato chips were actually also, I can't read it because it's too small, but the instruction was to scatter on the wall. I think it was a redness of something natural and something man-made. So the work actually, when it has to be reinstalled, for instance here with this dead bird, when the work had to be reinstalled, it would mean that the installation would be remade, but the operating system would remain the same. So here you have the same, and it is one where it is, to save the gadolinium, you need to match up the body temperature of a young person, learn how to live with struggles. So what you see here is also that it is already an earlier model of the learning machine of GPT. It is a GPT-2, so which was one that could be pre-trained by the artist himself from scratch, but also one that was still making errors. So the beauty of the work is actually the errors that will give birth to those kind of works, where the poetry comes from what would have been a very man-made error, but here programmed into the system itself. And what is interesting is to compare with another AI work that is by the artist Cooper Jacobi. So it's a show that was held at the same moment called Mirror Run Mouse at the gallery High Art in Arles. And here you have kind of a different approach because it's going to be more dealing with fiction, with speculative systems. So you can see here it's a wall panel that has been covered with thermochromic paint. So a paint that is reacting to the climatic factors where it is found. So it will become very dark, it is very hot, and here it's probably a rather cool temperature. And in the middle you see a thermostat, so used for giving the temperature. A thermostat that is looking rather vintage. It's from the early 2000s, meaning that it's probably the one that is going to be found in most Occidental homes. And so inside that thermostat, the artist has programmed a system, which is also GPT-2, that he has been feeding science fiction text. Science fiction text dealing with climate, dealing with the end of humanity. So, for instance, Octavia Butler, Ursula K. Le Guin, or Joy Williams. So each of the small thermostats are showing both the temperature and the text of the new science fiction, climate fiction that is being shown on the screen. So here you can see also the form is going to take as a book form, meaning that we'll always have the coordinates of the temperature and the coordinates of that very specific moment in time, meaning that it is the moment where the GPT-2 system was operating. So what is regained here is actually a certain moment, both in time and space, because the system is continuing to run. The system is going to develop more and more the parameters it has been trained with. And that time it is also putting an end to that race to optimization, because now it is already GPT-5, I believe. But that work, it is not playing on a character of being vintage, it is just playing on a character of being situated in a specific temperature, and also developing that narrative that it is fed with. So what you can see here is also, through the machine, a certain subjectivity that is reappearing, a subjectivity that is not human, but that is another definition of subjectivity, meaning that it is at the intersection of fluxes, intersection of reacting to an environment, of being made by technological fluxes, and also social parameters. So it is actually really a way of rethinking position and position in relation to humanity. So you can see how actually the fact that using a technology that is not looking vintage, that is not looking old per se, is also a way of avoiding to fall back into maybe an attitude that would refuse technology. Here it is rather a strategy of slowing down a certain technological progress. And when I spoke about obsolescence would maybe make it feel a bit too vintage. But if you think now of the word slow down would also bring you back to a history of social struggle. The slowdown, or I think in the UK called the go slow, is a strategy of not striking, not putting an end to a certain process, but just trying not to be as productive as usually. So you can protest in a factory, for instance, by refusing to go faster, by refusing to earn money, by refusing to be an individual capitalist peg in the machine. So here, with artists using a new technology but using it a bit differently, you have this kind of strike, of slowdown, of critical strategy that is reappearing. And it doesn't mean that those artists are going to work only with old materials or with natural materials, but it is really producing that kind of slight friction that is enough to bring back a certain critical conscience. And so here, I was thinking about digital labor, and the last slide I put on the side was actually just to show you that Davide Bellula, so the artist we saw with the protocols, actually is using that at the same time as he's also implementing kind of ecological conscience in his way of working. So that means a kind of the same attitude to the art world. So he's still making shows. We know that if you make a show, it is going to be have an impact on the climate. But when he did that first show that I showed you the images of, it was also the first time that he would implement in the gallery his climate impact report. So climate impact report is a system where every artist and every gallery who sign in from the program will actually show how much energy has been used for the show. So here you can see a breakdown of his show at the gallery. So you can see how much energy he has used for the flight, for the road, for the shipping, and also for the AI. And what is interesting is you can see that the paintings actually were way more CO2 costful than the AI works on the sculptures. And so it is also a way of showing how the two can actually go hand in hand, and how maybe for once we have a kind of new technological era that is opening, and yet with a critical conscience that is directly implemented and that doesn't have to wait for centuries to come, like it was the case over there. And now we'll ask you for a few minutes so we can install the chairs for the panel talk.
Where you want to go?
Where we talk?
But is this, did you talk now?
Yeah, the four of us will talk now. Take some pictures for the four of us. posso ask Antonio if he's in front, yeah? Good evening, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. And now we're trying to touch a bit on what we've heard in these introductions, and because I guess AI is a topic that is very connected to art, but opens up also a lot of other questions connected to all our lives. So even existential, ethical, even business questions that are related to some project that we were talking about. And the idea is to ask a couple of questions to each speaker, and then to open the debate, hoping that there are some also some opinions and questions that you want to share with us. So we'll try to keep it a bit short so that we can engage this conversation. I would start with you, Tirdad, and talking about the algorithmic curatorial attitude. So algorithm is actually a procedure. It's not just something that happens just in artificial intelligence. Algorithm is a procedure to do things and to have an outcome. These curatorial experiences, like with algorithms, happened in other biennale, for instance, in 2019 in Liverpool, when people were asked to bring ideas and artworks to train a curatorial agent, an artificial agent, to choose the artworks. And at the same time, in Bucharest, for instance, in 2022, even the Biennale, there was another curatorial agent who was an artificial intelligence. So how do you confront with these experiments after you have successfully confronted with this experiment at Mudam, and what can be the role of a human curator, and what AI can do and what AI cannot do when it comes to curating an exhibit?
Those are three questions packed into one. I'll start with the one, and then we can have a conversation. You drew my attention to those two Biennale examples, and I found them really refreshing and helpful. And the way that I relate to them is not in the sense of these heralding some kind of a new era beyond the human role of the curator. I don't think it has this kind of revolutionary umph. I mean, we've been talking about the end of the human role for a long time now. I think Ingrid pointed to that, and then also we've been talking about the end of the human touch also in literature, the end of the author, and in art, I think since photography at the latest, there was this anxiety. And the human touch is fetishized and romanticized by much too important parts of the art world for this to really be endangered. And I don't think that these very rigorous experiments, of which we've heard some today,
for me as a curator who is not invested full time in these questions, it's more helpful to see these experiments as part of a broader context that are attempting to go beyond very traditional ideas around quality, very traditional ideas of professional trust, who is allowed to have a say in which situation. Also, attempts to think about infrastructures more broadly is something which has been an enormous help for me as a curator, trying to think beyond the usual authorial roles. These efforts take an enormous amount of time and energy and specialization. If an artist tries to think about infrastructures as part of her work and to take that seriously and to render that a creative dimension of her practice, this takes years, decades perhaps. What I see as something very promising in terms of this turn towards the numerical, the algorithmic, also perhaps certain innovations using blockchain technology, is that particular forms of knowledge become more simple and more accessible, and free up much more energy to be invested in artistic and political and conceptual questions that would otherwise be bogged down in endless study of extremely intricate detail. So if I look at these experiments as part of a much broader effort to turn art production into something more genuinely democratic, then this is something that is extremely helpful and inspiring, for lack of a better word, for a curator like myself. Does that answer the question? Sure.
Yeah, so you talk about democracy, and also I think it's quite connected to the idea of our democracies and the idea of obsolescence that you were also talking about before, Ingrid. The fact that we live in a capitalistic democratic society, and this I would say that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of the capitalism, but also some artists are still trying to challenge this idea, probably because they don't feel at ease in this system, or because they want to challenge because they see that things, they feel, they act, and they have ideas that sometimes don't match with this idea of always being on the edge of technology, always changing things, always, and they prefer sometimes fixing or sometimes drive our attention on things that still work or things that make mistakes, as we have also seen in Jerry's work, which is very interesting. Do you think that AI is changing the way in which artists are resisting to this capitalistic attitude of respect to the past, let's say?
Yes, but I would not speak about resistance, because I think there was a big shift that appeared, I would say, earliest in 2000, and that was this moment where actually being outside of any system, outside of capitalism, the idea of counterculture was actually not valid anymore. And I speak of 2000 because you have this very big and important book, Empire, by Anthony Negri and Michael Hart. And they were really the ones, I think, that the first realized that it was not possible anymore to have a position of being outside. And this would only be illusionary. And so I think from there we have seen several positions that again have led to where we are now. Meaning that in the 90s you have this whole perception of artists working with the glitch, the error. And that was a way of trying to halt the system, trying to halt the race. But then if you go to the 2010s, and you're speaking about capitalism, you would more have thoughts of, for instance, accelerationism, which is being inside but making the system crash by accelerating it and bringing it to its extreme. You have all those notions that you have to work from the inside, that you have to do things differently. It's not about finding a position of being outside, but trying not to leave the tools, the technology, to the people who have invented it. And that would mean, for instance, not being an artist, using a certain tool that is neutral, and not giving in to a tool that is at the same time infused with the ideology of Silicon Valley. It is not because it is like that it needs to stay like that. And I think with AI, we are seeing those users that is trying to find alternative users by using the same tool. And for instance, because I've been speaking a lot about linguistic models rather than image, I know quite a few, or I know a few writers who actually are trying to feed the models that now are not self-trained, but that are really scraping their content from all of the internet by putting their books for free on Google, on the internet. So those are authors like Stephen Shaliro or Warren Neidish that are coming from the acceleration in thought, 2000s, but they are trying to make a small contribution by feeding the models with their thoughts of leftist, post-accelerationist thoughts.
Yeah, this reminds me, like, coming back to you, Jerry, to the work you do with your small artificial intelligence, with all the languages that you train. I'm very fascinated by your co-creation or your mingling with AI, because you've been spending a lot of time, you said, in working with AI, and there are now a lot of issues connected to the way in which of authorship. So a lot of artists are afraid of losing their jobs, or maybe they think they will, and there's a big span of art creation, of course, going from automated art where artificial intelligence creates art by itself, to the other span where artists talk about artificial intelligence without using it. But there's all these middle nuances where artists try to find a way to co-create, to engage with an AI in different ways. So technology has always been part of art, and it's with the web brushes and then photography, as Ingrid was saying. But why did you, were you so fascinated by the AI when it came out, and how do you see the role of the artist changing now, of you, instead of, or you disappearing or reappearing somewhere else, or what's happening to you while you go through the process?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think maybe as humans we didn't do so well lately. We're kind of destroying the earth, and I get all these questions by people saying AIs will disrupt or challenge or even kill us or whatever. I think maybe it's not so bad that we hand this over to other entities as well, and I'm also talking about more biological entities and other forms of intelligence. And for me, this AI is one form of intelligence that swarms around on our globe that we could use, and it's just one of them. And this human strongholds that has been going on for so long, and it's in my view disrupted a lot, or in many people's views, I guess, should step aside a bit and take it easy with all these assumptions also about these intelligence. So that's one view I have of it. It's quite radical, and a lot of people freak out about this idea. But maybe it's interesting to think about it in that way for a change, instead of this freaking out all the time. And also, yeah, I refuse to use all these big ChatGPT, Midjourney, all these big AIs, because they're just capitalist toys. And in another way, I also see that the culture should be open for everybody, should be accessible for everybody, and also everybody should be able to make works with other people's works, like collages in the past and all these things. And that's what's happening with AIs now. You know, you see all these artists popping up in details, in images, and which I find quite interesting. It's of course money-wise, it's not so good for a lot of people because they lose their trademark in a way. It's become one big thing.
I would go back to you, Tirdad, with an issue connected to the archive, because your exhibit was the exhibit you co-curated was a lot about the archive, and archives are a big topic now because any data set at the end can be an archive, and using algorithms to curate, of course, and to extract artworks from the archive, it makes explicit the fact that a kind of a deterministic choice, which all the limits that opens up the possible biases that there are when someone makes choices within the archives, which are, and for instance, there's the work of Giulia Taurino. The recommender system is broken, and she also was trying to use, there are not many works of artists trying to deceive these archives, and try to spot, for instance, from the archives, things that you could never see because of the profiling of the recommendation system usually allow you to see just the more, like in TripAdvisor or in any other recommender system, just let you see the most famous or acquainted or known or clicked items, while in this way, in this work also in the curation that you did, you came out with some works that probably would have never been exposed in other contexts. So the topic of the biases, how would you address the issue of more inclusive and decolonial curatorial practices with these AI tools, so that we can also include things that usually are not included? What are the challenges at stake in this case?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I can say a few things about the archival question, and maybe add a few things that respond to your earlier question of what algorithms can do. So the how to put it, the aristocratic idea of the museum is a place where inclusion is a curse word, and where the idea is to accumulate scarce objects and scarce knowledge about those scarce objects, and this is what cements your authority as a kind of connoisseur. And the debate has shifted over time to a place where we are mainly preoccupied with questions of inclusion and exclusion and representation, as you alluded to earlier. And these questions are far from being resolved because they're displaced to the question of who can make these decisions, and then also what happens to the things which were included once they are part of the collection. Are they still a multiplicity, a heterodoxia, an other, once they are part of a place like the Mudam? I think that algorithms, the experiment here really showed how you can sidestep certain endless circular discussions and just trust in a kind of mathematical set of working premises that suddenly lead you to situations that you hadn't expected. You mentioned that there are surely artworks that we would never have thought of otherwise, which are in the show. This is true. But even in the programming, during the opening week, we did an event on the 1953 Family of Man exhibition by Ed Steichen. And we did that because the algorithm told us to. We wouldn't have otherwise. And it was a bit awkward, and a bit unexpected, weird. We brought in a specialist from Paris as well. But it raised questions that we saw, for example, that there were really unexpected parallels between the deep down efforts and the Family of Man with regards to being on the threshold of a technological transition,
we saw the appetite to de-authorialize and depersonalize, which I hadn't really noticed in Steichen this way before. So yeah, the answer is that a very, very, very simple algorithm such as ours, I mean, ours is as simple as it gets. It was like a recipe for lasagna is more complex than our algorithm. Even that led to, very unusual results. Maybe I can throw in just 2 or 3 other sort of talking points that came up. I think that algorithms help to demystify meaning making within art. Within art, we really fetishize this kind of open-ended, indeterminate form of meaning making, and this comes with this anti-didactic, anti-numerical, automation type of impulse. It's a very traditionalist idea of art as this adventurous, kaleidoscopic chaos of meaning creation. And what I think that efforts such as this can do is they can demystify this kind of fetish. And they prove that even if you trust in automation or the algorithmic, what is stubbornly weird about art, if that's what you're married to, will persist. It's not exorcised. It's not. It doesn't suddenly evaporate into some kind of a grid. It remains part and parcel of the whole equation. Then there are other aspects too, which would take too much time to go into, and some of them I mentioned earlier, like it breaks through certain networks, certain sort of forms of corruption, which in the art world we lend the euphemism to of friendship. I work with my friends. This kind of thing leads to certain exclusionary mechanisms, which, with the help of an algorithm, can be circumvented. Yeah, there's more, but I'm sure.
Ingrid, I would keep I would stay in the topic of the archives, because we spoke about archives in the curatorial domain, but there are, as we said, any data set can be an archive, and we're full of data sets. For instance, there was a work at the la Culture in Luxembourg, maybe you saw it, which where an artist, Roberto Fassone, fed the eye with trip reports, so people who wrote psychedelic stories about they're eating mushrooms, psychedelic mushrooms, so hallucinated an AI basically, and that was an archive, and that archive brought to a specific way of behaving and outcomes of the AI. But of course, archives have always been a fascination for artists. But what's, like, in your perspective, what are the questions that opens up now in the contemporary art with this matching of archives and dataset in the world of the artist? Since I haven't seen many artists yet exploring in creative ways in the last period archives, but maybe you know more, or there are questions that are open on that.
No, but again, to come back to 2010, because I think it's really a pivotal moment. And because I'm doing my PhD on that period, I have been noticing that actually there was this moment of very big technological enthusiasm where nobody was actually thinking about the fact that they might have to archive this moment. Also because it was thought of, it was really the epitome of the end of history, a kind of happy end of history, but still a kind of end of history. And so it was kind of perpetual present, where the artists from the 2010s didn't think that it might be interesting to someone afterwards, or didn't think that the history would progress and would want to learn the lessons maybe from the failures of what happened 10 years ago. And I think that nowadays we're actually coming back to, if you look at kind of art historians, coming back to a very more historicized era. And I feel that AI is actually not uninteresting, because you have this historical consciousness that is coming back, but coming back from inside the present. So you have, with AI, it's this kind of weird mingled historical consciousness is doing his different is a kind of